Hello, and thanks for watching. This show, Our Global Voice, hopes to bring you a series of quality shows from around Sacramento, dealing with social conditions, and we'll have a special focus on law and order issues. As a law enforcement officer, community activist, mentor, and former city council candidate, I see these issues as being very important. In this show, you'll hear comments from an interesting and dedicated public servant, Judge Troy Nunley of the Sacramento Superior Court. For decades, America has been drowning in crime, and we can't seem to come up with the right formula. Crime leaves us with a sense of unease, and too many others just live in fear of crime. Crime results in arrests, prosecutions, and lengthy incarcerations, which eat up large portions of public budgets, and more young folks appear to be involved in crime. We hope this interview with Judge Nunley is one step to finding a local answer to the nagging puzzle of crime. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay. I grew up in San Francisco. I grew up in the San Francisco Hunters Point housing project. My mom had 4 kids, and we are essentially a year apart. So by the time I was 2, my dad left home. So my mom was raising 4 kids in a project, ages 2, 3, 4, and 5. My oldest sister, she was the oldest, and then we have 3 boys. My mom always believed in education, so we went to the local, from the earliest recollection I have is we always went to private school. And my mom made some tremendous sacrifices to send us to private school. Her idea was that education was a way for us to get out of that environment and make something positive of ourselves. So that was it. We grew up in the bad neighborhood, but we went to a very good school in the area. And she entrusted the, teachers, the nuns, to raise us. And at the time, they still believed in corporal punishment, and they had a very heavy hand. And that continued throughout, for example, high school. I went to high school, a private high school. My mom still made sacrifices. And we didn't have much, we didn't have much in terms of material things. We had a very warm, close-knit, very insular family. But in terms of material things, we didn't have a lot because everything was going towards educating all 4 of us. And so that's sort of my earliest upbringing in terms of elementary school and high school. It was all private school. And then I elected on my own when I went to college. I actually elected to go to a private college because I was happy with the way the Catholics had provided education. And so I went to a Catholic college as well.
You mentioned the Hunters Point area. We've talked before. I'm from San Francisco, Trailview. A little bit of a rivalry there, but we both know about the backgrounds of those places. So for someone to escape the poverty and the violence there, I know where folks are coming from. So do you mind telling high school, for example, what subjects did you study, and what did you like, and did you play sports?
In terms of subjects that I studied, I was always a good reader. I always read. I read everything. I started off reading comic books. I read the newspaper. I remember my mom, and that was one thing, when my mom had us going to school, she kind of led by example. My mom also went to school when we were young. She went to school, and that's why we really didn't have a lot. She went to school, and she actually worked at the telephone company because her feeling was she didn't want us to see or receive any type of public benefits, and so she didn't want to be on welfare, didn't want us to receive any of that. So I would see her go to school, and I'd see her bring home these big books, and I always thought, I can read those books. And so it was a challenge to me to pick up her college books and read through them. And my mom was the kind of person, if you read something or if you did anything, she would challenge you on it. So she would always ask, what did you read? And what was that about? And she'd read things by Sigmund Freud. She was reading things by Shakespeare. She was reading all these fabulous books, and I was picking them up at a very early age and just reading through them. And that was my gift. I think we each had our individual talents as kids growing up, and that was my gift. My gift was reading, and I just read everything. So it was natural for me when I went to college in high school is to emphasize English. I always emphasized English classes, drama, because of course English gives you the ability to be articulate, the ability to talk to folks, and so that was my big thing. And I always loved writing. And my mom always had this thing, she would say, well, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a businessman, you're going to be, this, and you're going to be that. And when she said that, I think initially she was kind of saying like most parents say, but I took it to heart and I said, I'm going to go into law. And so when I started saying that, my mother would always tell me, well, you got to read, you got to learn to write. And so that was important for me. So I emphasized those, and I got in a bunch of AP classes, advanced placement classes in high school, and I was able to sort of nurture that. Now, when I was at high school, when I first got to high school, I played all of the 3 traditional sports. I played baseball, I played basketball, and I played football. And then I dropped out of baseball, and I subsequently ended up playing football and basketball. And I was still doing well in school. I was advanced placement in a lot of my classes. I was hovering around a 4.0. I actually graduated with a 3.8. But that was my emphasis. My emphasis was English, but my emphasis was on sports. I love sports. But by the time my junior year rolled around, I had a football coach, who really it discouraged me from continuing, and it was a personal thing where he got really upset at me about something that I did. It was my responsibility. It was something I did, and I was being recruited pretty heavily as a junior by a lot of Pac-10 schools. I really wanted to go to Stanford, and because of this incident that happened with my coach, he said he wasn't going to give the college recruiters any type of information, only negative information about me. And it was my fault. It was something I brought about myself, and if I had to do it over again, I would have done it differently. But that was my athletic career there, and I always knew that I had the ability to do well academically, so that's really what my focus was after that. It was just academics.
Okay. Can you tell me just a little bit, maybe briefly, about your career progression, maybe some assignments that you've had?
Okay. I started off, I'll tell you, when I initially wanted to go into law, I always knew I wanted to be a trial attorney. That was a given. And because of my background, my experiences, some of the things that I saw happen in my community, I initially said I wanted to go into criminal defense. And I remember talking to my mother about it. And she said, well, I think you can do a better job as a prosecutor on the other side. And so I went into prosecution. And she was absolutely 100% correct, because the one thing that I saw happening, at least in my community, I saw justice being done, there's no doubt about that, but I saw injustices being done as well. And my feeling was that I can deal with those things better as a prosecutor. So I first went to work for the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. Actually, initially I went to work for San Francisco District Attorney's Office as a law clerk. I worked there during law school. And then I went to work for Alameda. At the time, Alameda had a national reputation. It was considered one of the best, if not the best, district attorney's office in the nation. And I said, I want to work there. And so I went over, filled out an application, got a job as a law clerk, and worked there. They liked what I was doing, and then out of law school they hired me as a deputy district attorney. I went to work initially, I was doing low-level misdemeanors and traffic things, and then that's how we all started off. I graduated to felony preliminary examinations, went up to the felony trial team, and then that's where at the time I was going to do felony trials, and then I decided I wanted to take a different path, and I wanted to start my own law firm. And that was always my thought, that I wanted to do everything the law had to offer, and I felt it was just time for me to go. I was in good standing, had a great relationship with the office, and they never understood why I wanted to leave in the first place. But I left, and part of it, I was starting a family, and I needed a little bit more income. So I went to private practice. I did federal civil rights law. I did employment discrimination. I did a lot of civil work, personal injury work, and of course I did criminal defense. I did a lot of that. And at some point, we decided that we wanted to move from the Bay Area, from San Francisco to Sacramento, where my wife is from. And my feeling was that it was a luxury to live in the Bay Area, so I'm gonna reprocess and go back to Sacramento. But at that time, I said I don't want to go back into criminal defense. I liked it, and it was lucrative, and there were some aspects I liked, some aspects I didn't like. And so I came here and went to work for the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, and I worked there for about 3 years. I left. I was in the gang unit, doing a lot of gang stuff, a lot of homicide cases, and then I decided that I wanted to go work for the Department of Justice and do appellate work. And so I went and worked for the Appeals Writs and Trials section, and that was a great job. I got an opportunity to serve as the state's expert on criminal street gangs. I was on a hate crimes task force. I got an opportunity to do a lot of work with domestic violence, with racial profiling, and so it allowed me to sort of really expand my horizons even further. And of course, I did appellate work where I worked on, felony appeals and also death penalty capital cases. And then that's when I got appointed to the bench from the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Well, as you know, we have some serious social problems, and crime remains at the top of the list. What are you seeing from the bench?
What I'm seeing is twofold. And I'll break it up. I think it's important to realize that, we got two systems here. We got the juvenile system and we have the adult system. From the adult system, what I'm seeing is that the efforts to rehabilitate that I grew up with, that I was aware of when I was younger. Remember, my mother was a probation officer for almost 30 years. Once she graduated from college, actually while she was at college, she became a probation officer. And what I used to see when she was a probation officer, I saw community-based organizations that sought to reintegrate people into the community, sought to deal with certain issues that people were having just by virtue of just being members of society, a complex society. And we were focused on helping those people, helping people, for example, who went to prison reintegrate themselves back into society. And what I'm seeing at the adult end is that those programs that we had that sought to help people, and I'm not saying they were necessarily 100% successful, those programs no longer exist. I think that we have turned into a society that is punitive, that incarcerates people, but after the incarceration, we have to realize that these people are going to integrate or seek to integrate back into society. And my chief concern and what I'm seeing on the bench is that I don't think we're doing an effective job rehabilitating and reintegrating these people back into society. And I think that needs to be a focus. It's tough because there's no resources. The resources have dried up. We do have some organizations, faith-based and otherwise, that are seeking to help those adults that we deal with, but by and large, a lot of those programs have really dried up. Now, from the juvenile end, I'm more hopeful on a juvenile end, just because the nature of young people is that, we kind of build into our lives this notion that young people are allowed to fail. They'll fail, but we kind of expect them to pick themselves back up. And the reason I say I'm hopeful is because the young people that I see come before me, I don't care what they do. They could commit the most heinous and atrocious crimes down to the lowest level crime. I think there's some point where they still have hopes that they can be productive members of society. Okay, and so I'm hopeful on the juvenile end, although I recognize that we're also sending these young people back into the same communities where they came from, and a lot of the same issues that may have served as contributory factors in them committing crimes are still there. And what I advocate is that we have to sort of shake these young people up, get them out of their comfort zones and let them see that, listen, going back to this community is not a right that you have. It's a privilege that we allow you to go back to this community. And I think we've had some success in juvenile court with taking young people out of the community and sending them what we call level B placement, sending them out of state and letting them know, really, in a very realistic sense, that your place in the community, your privilege to live there, you've given it up, so you got to go somewhere else. And if you take advantage of these out-of-state placements and do certain things, you jump through these hoops, you can come back to the community, okay? And so that's the difference I see, and I think it's a matter of resources, the dwindling resources. I do think that the people who are working with juveniles particularly, their heart is really into it, they're really trying, but even then, they have dwindling resources. The resources are drying up.
This is a question that might be a little tough for you, but if you think back over maybe, say, the last 20 cases you've tried, what sense did you get about maybe the average age? Is it firearm use? Is it gangs? What's going on out there?
That's a good question, because it's interesting, because sometimes you see an older criminal who comes before you who's never used a weapon. You look at his rap sheet, for example, and he has theft-related offenses, but never any weapons and never any violence. And then the younger criminals, you see their crimes and their criminality skews towards violence and weapons. And I can almost tell you that in a certain age bracket, it's almost the case that weapons are being used across the board with certain segments of our population, and it skews younger, and they're getting more and more violent. And I think I'm starting to see, and you mentioned the last 20 cases, you're starting to see too, I saw a couple cases come before me where I was looking at the rap sheets and looking at the history, and you see a person who, for example, committed drug-related offenses, like theft offenses, or they had interspersed with possession offenses, okay, and drug use offenses, and being under the influence. And then you start to see where they've gone to prison, they've come out, and then you see a weapons offense. And I think, and I've talked about this with several judges, and I sort of put the theory out there that now we're starting to see people go to prison and they're coming out more violent, okay? They're not coming out with a sense that I can make something of myself or I want to make some positive changes. Some of them are coming out meaner and more violent. And so over the last 20 cases, I have seen a lot of weapons used. It skews younger. I've seen a lot more child abuse type cases. I've seen a lot more molestations of younger people, be it family or someone that you're associated with. It's rare that in those types of crime is interest. I think the public has the impression when we talk about molesters or we talk about rapists, we talk about stranger molestations or stranger rapes, but usually it's within a family, within a community, someone you know. And so we're seeing a lot of those. But in terms of the violence that you mentioned, in that aspect, I mean, that's a very good question, because I think that's skewing younger. I think that's what we're seeing now. A lot of gang violence, a lot of accessory type violence where people are conspiring to commit violent acts, and that's usually in the context of a gang. And we're seeing a lot of that. I think because of the economics situation of our society now, we're seeing a lot more domestic violence cases, because a lot of our domestic violence cases tend to be economic. They're economic based, and people's frustration comes out in the form of violence like that. So the last 20 cases, I'd say, if I had to say a range of cases, that's what I'm seeing. We are seeing the violence. The weapon use tend to skew younger.
Okay. Two quick questions, and we can move on to the next subject. We'll talk about maybe off the top of your head, the sentences that you're handing down for the young folks. Pretty lengthy?
No, in juvenile court I'll say no. It's rare in juvenile court, for example, that you send a kid to what we commonly refer to as CYA, California Youth Authority. Now we refer to it as Department of Juvenile Justice, and the facilities are the Department of Juvenile Facilities. We rarely send a kid to what we call kid prison. That's CYA or DJF. We rarely send a kid to DJF. So we're not seeing a lot of that in terms of the kids. Now, the younger adults who come before me in adult court, absolutely. You're seeing now where you get a person who's, say, 23 years old, and you look at and they got 3 strikes. And you can't justify striking a strike because it would be an abuse of discretion, and it would be a favor to someone that really hasn't earned it. So you are seeing a lot of younger people go away, say, for example, based on the 3 strikes law. I think the district attorney does a great job of evaluating 3-strike cases and deciding what cases they're going to proceed as 3-strike cases and what cases they're not going to proceed by way of, say, striking a strike, for example. And so in terms of that, you do see a lot lengthier sentences for younger adults who come before me in adult court. If I have the discretion, I will strike a strike. If a minor or a young person has a young adult has a compelling reason, and he's not a 3-striker, and he has a compelling reason for why he did what he did, if he has a great prospect for the future, if all his indicators seem to show me that this is aberrant behavior that's not likely to reoccur, then I might give him a break and take a chance on him on probation and put him on probation, maybe give him some county jail time or some work projects. So I am taking chances on some of the younger people, because those are the people who I think should have hope, the people I hope are going to reform. And so I am taking some chances, but we are starting to see a lot younger adults go away for more lengthy sentences because of their prior records and because the instant offense is a violent offense. It's a violent offense. It's a serious offense.
Okay. Or get us a little more information about it, the comment you made earlier about how folks would were once able to discipline their neighbors' kids, put a check on them. When you look around society today, and we kind of talked about this earlier, maybe kids are becoming more violent. Maybe they're getting involved in more serious crimes at an earlier age. Do you have any comments on what are some of those things we might be able to do to curb that before it reaches the criminal justice system, or
I think that one of the things that we've done is I think we've conveniently said to ourselves that I don't want to say anything to this kid because he appears to be violent, or I don't want to say anything to this kid because I don't know him. I don't want to say anything to him because I'm afraid of how his parent would respond. Okay. A few years ago, this whole notion of it takes a village came out, and I'm a strong proponent of that whole notion. I think that inherently kids want discipline. Kids want structure, okay? And they want that. And I think that it's incumbent upon us, and if enough of us say it, let's say, for example, if you live in a community where the entire community will chastise you or take you to task for something wrong you do. If you see a person outside spray painting a building, for example, and if every person that walks by says, hey, stop spray painting that building, put that spray can down, okay? I'm going to call the police, put it down, don't spray paint our property, and start, if everyone takes a proactive approach, I think that sends a message to the young person doing that. And that tells them, listen, there's structure in this community, and when I come into this community and try to act out, they take me to task for it, okay? And I think we don't need to overly emphasize law enforcement's role in that. That's something we can do ourselves. And obviously, if there's something that transpires after that, like, for example, the person tries to retaliate, that's when you really want to get the law enforcement involved. But I'll say this, in those communities that, for example, have community watches and they have proactive communities, those communities have less problems than, say, a community that doesn't have those things. And I think that we all need to take some responsibility, because that's really the way America used to be. America used to be a community that cared about your neighbor's kid, that cared about the welfare of your neighbor's kid. And we should, even if a parent said, you call a parent up and they say, I don't want to hear that, well, you're going to hear it. Whether you do something about it is a entirely different story, okay? We have to hold these kids accountable. We've got to hold the parents accountable. And we can't give up and say, listen, let's wash our hands of it because I think this is what's going to happen. I don't think they're going to respond well to it, okay? And if enough of us do it, I think it makes a huge difference.
Okay. You mentioned that you've worked in both the juvenile courts and the adult courts. What's the youngest person that you've had to deal with in juvenile court, which you're not trying to send to prison, but you're trying to provide some type of punishment or correction? And then, what's the youngest person that you've had to sentence as an adult in adult court, but who's really a juvenile?
9. The youngest I've dealt with has been 9, and he was a kid. I'll tell you what happens in juvenile court. Generally speaking, if you have a 9-year-old who comes to court for committing any type of offense.
As you're speaking, I'm trying to process 9
yes.
in juvenile court. Go ahead.
It is so hard to see it because they're kids and they still, and a 9-year-old in juvenile hall is funny because they are still kids. And when you turn off the lights, you know what they want? They want their mama. And they start crying for their mama. And it's the most harrowing thing you could ever hear is the tears from a kid who just really wants to go home. Youngest I've sentenced has been, I believe, 15 to life in prison for murder. Okay, that's the one thing about juvenile court. If you commit murder, okay, first-degree murder, you're eligible for life in prison. And I'll tell you, the United States Supreme Court said that you cannot inflict a death penalty on a juvenile. Okay, so that's not the practice. But if you get 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who commit the ultimate crime, murder, then they're subject to going to prison for the rest of their life. Okay, and I have done that. I don't like it. I don't like doing that because even my feeling is that even a kid who commits murder is salvageable. It's salvageable because some of the murders, and I think you know this based on your job as a law enforcement officer, some of the murders are situational. They're very situational, and sometimes these kids get a false sense of bravado based on who they're around, and they may do something that they otherwise sincerely regret doing, okay? And we end up sentencing him to prison. I had a young man here several years ago who had, I believe he was 19 or 20. He went to trial on a murder case. And he had just, good kid, he had just signed or given an oral commitment to attend Oregon on a football scholarship. He was a running back in one of the local high schools, and he committed the ultimate crime. And I sentenced him to life, and I felt awful for it.
What images are conjured up in your head when you're sitting there, I'm guessing the night before, maybe even weeks before, knowing that you may have to decide to get a 15, 16, 17-year-old person, this heavy sentence?
It's hard. It's the hardest thing because you're essentially taking a child out of a family situation, and you're essentially saying, listen, you're not fit to live in society. Okay, you've committed a crime that's so bad that you can't live here. It sticks with me. And you and I both know, I grew up with people like that. I grew up with people who I've seen. One of my best friends has been in prison since high school almost, and he, from what I understand, is going to be getting out soon. Okay, he spent the majority of his life in prison, okay, for an offense that he could have easily avoided. So it sticks with me. I never lose sight of that. It really does stick with me. And each time I have a young person come here and go away to prison for a lengthy period of time, I agonize over it. I really do. I agonize over it. Unfortunately, sometimes the law is such that I have no discretion in terms of what I can sentence a person to, especially when we talk about first-degree murder, the most heinous crime. I have no discretion at all in that respect, and it lives with me. I think about it all the time because, like I told you earlier, I think that the ability to rehabilitate, to some extent, is dependent upon age, okay? And the funny thing is, the younger folks, I think we can rehabilitate. And it's funny because the older adults, sometimes I think we can rehabilitate as well, because sometimes they get tired. They get tired at some point, and they want to just have a different course of life, And so I do agonize over it, and I do think about it all the time, and I never lose sight of what I'm doing, and that keeps me humble. It keeps me humble.
I don't know what you think might be driving these kids to be more violent, particularly our males.
I think every single one of those factors you just named, and particularly when you're talking about the males, okay, the one thing that I see is that if someone comes up to you, for example, and says to you, you and I are at war, okay, and you say, well, what are you talking about? I don't want any war with you. Oh, no, you and I are at war. You better defend yourself. What are you going to do? You're going to defend yourself, okay? You could be the most peace-loving person, okay, but you're going to have a need to defend yourself, and then when you have a family involved, you're going to have a need to defend your family. I think we need to re-examine our approach to how we're dealing with these communities, how we're dealing with these gangsters.
That sounds like an appropriate place to end.
Well, thank you very much. I thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you.